Good evening. This submission is for Profiles in Peace, SSC 330, Peacemaking, a Global Study of Conflict Resolution and Activism. This is Peaeemaker, and today's date is 23 November 2020. For my Peacemaker, I selected Bono, lead singer of U2. We're going to discuss Bono's pop, his politics, and his peace. If there's one song that symbolizes Bono's mission, it would be Sunday Bloody Sunday. And I've included a portion of the lyrics here. And the battle's just begun. There's many lost, but tell me who has won. The trench is dug within our hearts, and mothers, children, brothers, and sisters are torn apart. One of the things that appealed to me about Bono is the fact that he realizes what a lot of the world is struggling with, which is the dissension and the separation from each other and the genuine lack of contentment and lack of satisfaction that at a human level we seem to want to share with each other but are struggling. Bono was born Paul Hewson, and he was born in Dublin, Ireland. He was born in 1960, and the time that he was born was a very difficult time during Ireland's history. Ireland was in the process of discovering its own identity, and there were constant struggles and battles between Catholics and Protestants, between Britain and Ireland, and there were battles, both physical and emotional, between the different categories of people, the different classes of people, and Bono was raised in the midst of that. During his senior year of high school, Hewson, which I'll refer to as Bono for the rest of this report, decided that he was going to form a band, and he and his bandmates all took monikers, and Bono was the name that he had chosen. However, his influence and his exposure to violence, both sectarian and religious, was first experienced when he was a youngster. He was about 12 during the episode which is referred to as Sunday Bloody Sunday. It occurred on January 30th of 1972. This was an altercation in which Bono's hometown, which is about 150 miles away from Derry, Ireland, was the scene of a violent altercation between individuals that were protesting British police interfering in their everyday lives, and the British police, who ended up taking the lives of 13 unarmed protesters. Again, this happened about 150 miles from Bono's home, and at the age of 12, it really was an influence, and it was a catalyst for his creativity. And it inspired the song Sunday Bloody Sunday, which was an ode to the violence that occurred, and it was also used to inspire worldwide peace protest. It was a song that was adopted after the September 11th attacks in New York City and was used all the way around the other side of the world in Bali when there were several bombings that killed many people. And again, this song is an example of Bono's desire for peace and how people around the world reacted to that, and the influence that he's had through his music and through his cultural diversity. I chose Bono because he was a musician that I grew up listening to. I listened to U2 when I was in middle school and high school, but I never realized the social value that the music and the lyrics had. It wasn't until I enrolled in this class that I understood just how much Bono was targeting some of the people that needed the most representation. For example, women and children, and those individuals in third world countries and in places that were constantly overlooked and had individuals that were oppressed and that were taken care of by United Nations, but were ignored by their home states and their home countries. Songs like Sunday Bloody Sunday focus on the civil rights abuses. For example, the British troops opening fire on unarmed protesters, and it really inspired those people who listened to do something and to actually pursue some change and to not be satisfied with just simply listening to a song, but instead we had to act. And songs like Sunday Bloody Sunday inspired me to become a social studies teacher because I realized that there were youth that had never heard of these events and never heard of activists that aren't necessarily carrying signs but are using their pop culture and their influence to take care of those around the world that don't have an audience or don't have a voice or don't have a microphone. So that's why I chose Bono. A little bit of background for him. Again, I mentioned that he was born in Dublin, Ireland. One of the most interesting parts of his upbringing that definitely led to the individual that he became and led to his exposure to both positive influences and the negative that inspired a lot of his activism was the religious dichotomy that he was raised in. His father was Catholic and his mother was Protestant. Now, in 2020 United States culture, that really isn't that big of a deal. But in Ireland, that was considered something that was illicit. And Bono said that he was raised in what was called a bigoted community. He was exposed to hatred. He was exposed to discrimination. And he was exposed to atrocities that happened in his own home under the name of religion. And one of the things that inspired me to dig a little deeper into Bono's background was his differentiating between spirituality and religion. And one quote that I think that says a lot about Bono is that religion is what happens when the spirit of God leaves the room. So he definitely says that there's a difference between being religious and being a worshiper of God. Religion, again, was used to persecute Bono, especially during his adolescence. Bono's mother died when he was about 14 years old, and according to Bono's biographical website, that was something that created a sense of despondency in him because his father was abusive, and there were many nights that Bono slept on the streets, and he was involved in a lot of street fights and a lot of gang altercations because he was exposed to religious persecution in his own home, so he had to fight physically and emotionally to overcome the persecution in an area where he was supposed to feel the safest. And what was more frustrating to him was that it was done in the name of religion, which was supposed to be peace, and instead it brought persecution to him. Spirituality. Again, in Sunday, Bloody Sunday, he talks about the battle that Jesus won. He is very in touch with Christian themes of the cross, crucifixion, forgiveness, redemption, specifically in songs like Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, where he mentions Jesus' cross, and the song 40, which is a direct pull from Psalms 40. However, Bono doesn't consider himself religious, and I think a lot of it has to do with what he experienced in his own home growing up in what was considered a religious home. One of the interesting quotes is that he said that he picked up from his mother and father was that religion gets in the way of God. At least seeing what religious people do in the name of God to his native land. Growing up in Ireland, where he saw Catholics and Protestants both claiming the name of God and both claiming the divine right to persecute each other, had to have caused him to question what spirituality and what religion was about. And the fact that he was able to still incorporate religious themes into his music just shows that there was a lot ingrained that people were not able to remove from him. And again, the quote that I had mentioned, which was something that I thought was really moving and telling about Bono, was it's almost like religion is what happens when the spirit has left the building. Early peacemaking. In 1983, Bono and U2 released their successful album called War. And it's ironic that an album called War would be released by somebody that I'm doing a report on for peacemaking. But he has a song on there called Seconds. And in that song, Seconds, he asked leaders to consider how they would spend the last moments of their life. And the last moments of their life are being extinguished by a nuclear attack launched by one of the superpowers, either the United States or the Soviet Union. And this song was released at the tail end of the Cold War, but there were still nuclear concerns. There were still fears that one nation would launch an attack against another. So in his song Seconds, it's geared towards people wondering how they spend the last moments of their life. But on a deeper sense, he's asking political leaders why they're positioning their people in a situation where they would have to wonder how their lives would end or what they would do if they were focused with a nuclear disaster. Additionally, he has songs that talk about pushing and pulling the button and saying goodbye. What you would do if we were to be in a nuclear disaster. And one of the lyrics that I think really talks much about what Bono wants to do is that he is mentioning that it's time for us to wake up and to call for action and to get rid of some of the weapons that are very outdated. And I think it's a peacemaker's stance to take. Bono was involved in one of the most popular Christmas songs still to this time. Do They Know It's Christmas Time at All? It was a song that devoted all of its efforts and energies and the finances that were gathered as a result of this song to combating hunger and starvation in Ethiopia. That is a peacemaking effort because where there's a lack of infrastructure, where there's a lack of support, where there's a lack of education or food or medical care, where there's a lack of the basic needs being met, there's a vacuum. And into that vacuum, warlords or dictators or gangs can come in and provide a sense of what the state or the government is not providing. So Bono was part of a group that wanted to encourage those of us who have the financial means to support those around the world who are starving. An additional song off of that album was called The Unforgettable Fire, and it deals with what life was like in the aftermath of a nuclear holocaust. Bono and the other members of U2 said that this song was inspired after they saw artwork that was created and paintings that were created by survivors of the American attack on Japan. And again, this is part of Bono's peacemaking effort to inspire people to put pressure on their political leaders to abandon nuclear weapons and to move past that. Finally, one of Bono's most popular songs through his group U2 was called Pride in the Name of Love, and it deals with the day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, April 4th, 1963, and he clearly calls the listeners to embrace the idea that even though Dr. King's life was taken, the pride of what he lived for, the pride of what he wanted to accomplish, and the pride of what he ended up giving his life for needs to be continued and needs to be carried on, which is equality, which is racial justice. And that's not something that your average young 23 or 24-year-old encounters, especially somebody who has a global audience the way Bono does. All right, peacemaking to capitalism. How does Bono turn corporate into compassion? According to author Nathan Farrell, Bono has turned or leveraged his influence in entertainment and fashion to provide him a platform as a nonpartisan political expert. Basically, what Bono did was he realized that there are ways to empower individuals without having to resort to military action or conflict. And the most clear way that he targeted people was through economics. He began a program called Project Red. And through Project Red, he contacted some of the most successful corporations in the world. For example, Apple, Nike, Starbucks, and Beats, amongst others. And he encouraged them to release a red-colored product of whatever their item may be. For example, red Starbucks cups, or red iPhones, or red Beats, and to donate a portion of those proceeds from the red-colored item to African AIDS research. Increasing the amount of medical support and financial support to those most needy in Africa would fill the vacuum that dictators would bring in or that oppressive regimes could bring in, so that individuals realized they did not have to resort to violence in order to gain support from their states. To date, RED has impacted more than 180 million lives, to include those most needy, women and children in areas like Rwanda, South Africa, and Ghana, countries that had previously been ignored by Western areas. The United States and the United Kingdom really did not have much individual support through organizations like RED. Additional efforts and focuses by Bono were in the areas of the Data Project, data standing for Debt, AIDS, Trade, and Africa. What Bono wanted to do through U2 and through his organization was to influence the governments of the United States, England, and other profitable nations to help with AIDS research and to help eliminate debt of African farmers and to help equal the trade field, because there was a lot of economic disparity between individuals in Africa that were being taken advantage of and the large corporations in the United States who were taking advantage of the individual farmers. And there was no economic sharing. There was no establishment of any type of global trade that would benefit the most exploited workers. So through the data projects and through another project called One, Bono wanted to eliminate global poverty and to reduce the amount of people that were taken advantage of by large corporations. Recent activism. Recent activism of Bono focused on Africa and bringing peace to an area where more people had experienced economic oppression than anywhere else in the world. According to Andrew Cooper, Bono had become a champion of the reformist agenda. Essentially, Bono had taken poor nations in Africa and brought their attention and brought their focus into the living rooms and into the headphones of American individuals. And it forced us to focus on issues like healthcare, profit sharing, and how we as Americans support corporations that either do or do not funnel money back towards aiding those who needed it the most. Coronavirus. The coronavirus has impacted all of us. We can't go anywhere without being exposed to this. Here we are 40 years after Bono became a global influence, and he's still in touch with what is affecting current society. He released a song called Let Your Love Be Known, and that focuses on individuals that are quarantined and suffering from depression and are inclined to either self-injure or to turn their depression outwards and injure those around them. And it's basically establishing a support network for people that are either on the front lines in medical care professions or isolated from other individuals. And one of the most touching lyrics is, "You can't touch, but you can sing." Not only is that a call for people who feel alone, it's symbolic of what Bono has done. Yes, Bono can influence individuals, but he can't not touch physically everyone that needs him. However, he's using his voice and he's saying, I can't touch every individual, but I can sing. I can provide a platform for individuals to reach out and connect to each other. And again, that's preventing violence because it's establishing relational connections and it's showing people they're not alone and they're not isolated. They don't have to resort to either self-injury or to aggressive natures that a lot of the quarantines can inspire. Bono's message of peace. Finally, how do we take this and focus it in an everyday world? When I was looking through research for this, I found that Bono is the first male figure to ever be nominated by Glamour magazine for a Global Peace Award. First male to ever be considered for this. And that's because of his focus on underrepresented people, women and children and minorities, and most especially the poor. And I think we focus as Americans on people who win elections or who sign peace treaties or who deal with disarmament compacts, and we laud them for their work, but we don't see or award the people that are working behind the scenes. And that's one of the things that Bono has done is he's realized that he doesn't need to be a political activist. He doesn't need to be a politician or an ambassador. He can use the platform that he's been given. And I've learned that peacemaking isn't just about stopping a war, but it's also looking at the factors that cause violence. And a lot of that is global poverty and global inequity and oppression of individuals and not providing them with medical care, not providing them with the basic needs of food and a roof over their head. And I think that's one of the things that Bono would be extremely engaged in now in the United States is healthcare. I think Bono would want universal health care, and he would want people to be able to feel like their basic needs are being met so that they're not resorting to violence. They're not having their anger overflow into a point where they feel that violence is the only way of making themselves known. I don't think that Bono would support Antifa activism, but I do believe he would want everyone to have the type of health care and economic support that would make their lives a little more survivable. And finally, in conclusion, you look at his song, how long must we sing this song? How long? Because tonight we can be as one. I find encouragement in that because that shows us that there is hope. There is a way for us to be able to reach out and connect to each other. We may be continents apart. We may have incomes that are very disparate, but we're able to reach out. We're able to connect to each other as a human race. And a song that was written in 1984 commemorating a tragic event that occurred in 1972 is still causing people to pause and consider their humanity and how they're connected to each other in 2020. So anyone that can inspire that type of connection and can devote their entire career to embracing change and embracing peace and walking away from nuclear weapons, walking away from military action, walking away from sectarian violence, walking away from racism, walking away from economic oppression, and instead supporting women, supporting children, supporting the poor. That's somebody that we should definitely emulate. And again, that's the definition of a peacemaker. My bibliography is included, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this class, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.